But it did happen.
Yeah.
And the consequences could have been an awful lot more serious than they actually were. But this, to be quite honest, was a night of shame when we look back in it.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, the nature of this report details certain things that the media have said very differently. When you hear numbers of 2,000 people broke into the stadium, that is a direct contradiction to what we were told at the time. And the reporting of it was there was 15,000. So you wonder, A, were the media over the top, or B, does this report lack any credibility when you start to hear? We all know what happened. We know that it was a complete and utter systemic failure from the government, from the FA, from UEFA, from the police through to Brent Council. And everybody understood that there was a challenge with this game. So when you look at the dynamics of what the report tells you, it tells you a lot of what we already know. We heard the chairman of the police on Michelle, my partner's news station, talk about the lack of police resource that was deployed to that event, and there wasn't enough police. So we know there wasn't enough policing. We know there wasn't enough planning. We know there was an abdication of responsibility from the FA and UEFA, and it was UEFA's event.
Yeah.
We know that Brent Council weren't involved. So what she's telling us is all the things that we know. What I don't see in this report was ticketing policies, like allowing the stadium to only be 2/3 full, part of the reasons why we had this behaviour from certain people that believed they could storm the stadium, and if there weren't any tickets available, they possibly wouldn't have been able to storm it.
It is suggested in the report that helped create the perfect storm.
Yeah, I mean, I've read the sound bites and not read the full report. I've seen the summation of it, but I look at it and say it's a systemic failure of an event. From a planning point of view, from a government using it as a test event, to the stadium, to the police, to the FA, to the UEFA, all of these are easy lessons to be learned. They're not difficult ones.
Showpiece final. I've been very fortunate to gone to around the world with World Cups, to South Africa, to Brazil, you name it, France, and outside the grounds, if you see the army, you see machine guns, you see
tanks.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And of course, when they just see a small barrier, I believe there was a lot. My two sons were at the game, and they said it was, somebody I think wrote about it in the press and said it was akin to being like in a prison where the prison officers had lost control and they were running amok everywhere in the building. It was ridiculous. 2,000 fans, I don't know where they got that from. What I can't really quite understand.
There was more than that.
I can't quite understand with all the cameras today around the ground that these people have not actually been charged. I don't know how many people have been charged, what retrospective penalties we've caught.
Over 100, I think.
People had spent their life savings on these tickets and couldn't get to their seats.
Yeah.
The fighting that took place was responsible fans who took the law into their own hands to say, we're trying to stop these people coming in because it'll affect us in the future.
Yeah.
These people who travel around the world. So it was quite a disgrace, really, a major event like that. And they have to hold their hands up and learn from it. Please God, it never happens again. And by the way, COVID was completely ignored as well. We had barriers near the ground. Once it was realised they couldn't get them in on time, they just lifted the barriers.
When you see a summing up like this from Baroness Casey, you realise, this was a near disaster. She says the final was a potentially glorious national occasion that turned into a day of national shame. However, they were all let down by a horde of ticketless, drunken and drugged up thugs who chose to abuse innocent, vulnerable and disabled people, as well as police officers, volunteers and Wembley staff, creating an appalling scene of disorder and coming perilously close to putting lives at risk. We are genuinely lucky there was not much more serious injury or worse, and need to take the toughest possible action against people who think a football match is somehow an excuse to behave like that. She's right, Simon. She's right.
Of course she's right.
This was horrendous in terms of an advert for the game in this country. It was the worst possible advert you could think. And how many lessons will be learned looking ahead? I mean, what are the chances of this ever happening again?
I think
the
wording "perfect storm" is just a that's a sort of. I'm not with that comment, because really what you do, you have to police these tournaments in the right way. How naive was it? In the build-up to the final, these so-called fans, these thugs that were turned up, they would have actually seen an opportunity that was potentially going to be happening.
Naive by whom?
Naive by the government, by the police, and surely by the FA. No,
where's UEFA's game?
Well, it's UEFA then.
Well, naive by anybody. I mean, throw in naive with anyone you like. Simon. It was an absolute disaster.
Absolutely.
Incidentally, for their part, the FA's chief exec, Mark Bullingham, this morning, the FA apologises for the terrible experience that many suffered within Wembley on what should have been a historic night for the game. He's right, actually. He's right, Simon. We should be remembering that occasion for the right reasons.
You also have to set the scene. So when you talk about perfect storm, I'm not suggesting you condone it, but you do have to set the scene of the state of the nation, of the state of people's outlooks, and then you have to look at it and say, why wasn't it policed properly? Of course you have to set the scene. You have to say that depletion of stewarding, depletion of policing was set about by a COVID-19 pandemic. The deployment of resource wasn't available. So all of those are scene setting, not excuses.
Yeah.
They're a scene setting. And then you look at it and ask yourself, why? Why would this amount of intelligence from government, from the DCMS, into the Department of Sport, into the FA, into the policing, into Brent Council, why? And very interesting, they talk about the way that these 4 or 5 different parties didn't work together. And also, one must not allowed to be a dominant force in these discussions when putting on these sort of events. So clearly, what you had was all these different factions operating in a certain way rather than looking at the problem. And they talk about intelligence. They knew this was coming. They knew they could see the climate.
They take advantage because they can see the doors open.
Yeah, but it's prevention.
There's no they're looking over their shoulder on Wembley Way and they're seeing 300 policemen that don't travel with them. When you get to the ground, there's no police in sight.
Sure.
So they break down the doors.
Societally, Martin, you use an example of people running around with guns. Societally, we don't have that mentality in our policing. We police by consent. So in different countries around the world, they have a very different policing mantra. So in this society, we look at the police in a certain way. So we might have to change the way the police are perceived. But also, when they start talking about changing the laws around policing, we do need to be careful of that because we've got the laws being changed around people being able to protest. We've got government intervention in the way that these things go on. This was a very simple exercise in systemic failing from people that do not take responsibility for the situation that was here. And it's not a difficult report to write because clearly and undeniably it wasn't policed properly.
Jim White and Simon Jordan, Monday to Thursday morning 10 till 1 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.